What's up, friends? Welcome to Web3 Academy, a place for entrepreneurs, creators, and marketers to explore and learn how to use Web3 to transform business models and create thriving communities. Enjoy this next episode.
GM, what's up, Web3 Academy? I am Jaybird. It is the weekly Doer Spotlight. As always, joined by my co-host, Kyle Reedhead. What's up, Kai?
What's up, friends? I feel like I need a nickname like you do, Jaybird. I just don't have that yet.
I'm experimenting with my digital identity as well as my in-person identity. Oh gosh, we just said we weren't going to talk about identity on this podcast. Today, super stoked to have with us Brayn Peters. Bryan is the co-founder of Sobel, which actually spun out of Consensus Mesh, which is their incubation and investment arm. He was also an early Bankless DAO contributor, part of season 0 there. He's a City DAO core team member and contributor, Polygon DAO, Genesis Squad, DAO Punks NFT early holder and instigator of their grant program. Bryan is just like wearer of many hats and an absolute enthusiast of decentralized work. Bryan, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us today.
GM, thanks for having me on. I had a lot of fun, particularly last year.
I got me a DAO Punk as well. I didn't realize you were a part of that. I got the t-shirt at home.
Yeah, I still got one I should claim before the year's up. But I think it was an excellent experiment. Sinjin and Bushi did an awesome job.
Yeah, they did. All right, well, let's begin as we always do. Bryan, we always like to start by asking what your rabbit hole story is. How did you first fall down the rabbit hole? Take us back to the origins of you getting involved in Web3 and decentralized work.
Yeah. So, I was pretty disillusioned during 2008 in the financial crisis. And, although I was an engineer in school, one of my favorite courses was macroeconomics, an Econ 101 course done by a really charismatic prof, and I became fascinated with it. And in 2008, I was quite disillusioned that I'd heard about Bitcoin at that point in time, and Satoshi and the white paper. And I feel like that was one of those moments in time where I missed something. And so that wasn't my rabbit hole moment, but in many ways it possibly could have been or should have been. But what it was actually more around work. So less about money, less about markets, although that was something that I watched and was interested in and felt tension around. But it was actually work because, that's a much more visceral experience. What I spend my time doing during the day and how I earn, my living and provide and support my life and my family's lifestyle. And that experience was something that I was always kind of chasing, like, how do I do this and meet those needs whilst actually having a good experience? I'm a bit of a hedonist at heart. And I think that work shouldn't be this, thing I do so that I can go and, use my money to purchase joy. I kind of want that joy there. And so I started out, in enterprise, consulting in the passenger rail industry. That was very definitely not it. I then started to chase it in the Silicon Valley, startup model in the tech ecosystem in Waterloo. And, I was certain that was it, right? And it wasn't so much about the ping pong tables. I didn't need a ping pong table at work to enjoy my work. It was the fact that they were selling this scrappy, fast, agile, flat, non-hierarchical way of organizing. And I was like, yeah, that's it. Like we're going to take ideas and we're actually going to build those ideas and not shelve them or, use safety regulations as a reason. That's a big thing in the rail industry. A lot of innovation is compressed by like the Code of Federal Regulations from some accident that happened, at the turn of the century. And so, the innovation was really stuck, and I was like, oh, it's got to be over here. And then I'm gonna have a great work experience because we're gonna be able to express our ideas, and that it's not gonna be suppressed by industry and politics or, the airline lobby shutting down, high-speed rail innovation in the US or these types of things. Like there's something happening here with this Silicon Valley model. But like, as it scaled and it hits, sort of about 60 people, and it's in that scale up phase, and, definitely through to the 120 mark, as it's growing, it starts to erode all of that, brings in this managerial hierarchy. And then we were starting to play these like really icky games. It started to feel like as I became a manager, I was having relationships and relationship dynamics with my peers with this power over, almost like they literally used, militaristic metaphors or parent-child metaphors. And I'm like, I'm not parenting my peers. This feels awkward and weird and gross. And similarly, I started to watch the social games I was playing in this power structure as it emerged, and how it suppressed, good ideas and just squandered the money and resources in the system, as well as like the human potential. And there's tons written about that, but like I became pretty obsessed with like how does that get better? And so this is where my rabbit hole moment actually happens. Sorry for the ramble. And as I'm starting to look into this, like first it was agile, software teams and how they operate with a sort of more autonomous way of working. They have much more autonomy within the Scrum to make decisions, and they carve out roles. And then it was like, okay, well, this isn't scaling. Like that's not what's happening up in the boardroom as I started to participate in that, shenanigans. And so I was like, okay, so what's going on here? So we're looking to scale that agile theory and organization. I just become like a massive organizational design nerd basically at this point. I'm less engineering, technological things, and more like, trying to understand the architecture of teams so that it actually feels good. And it's rather selfish, my whole point on this. And then, I start to catch limits of that. And I'm like, okay, so I need to be an entrepreneur myself, right? Because that's what's going to, remove this power over relationship. Then I start to recognize the relationship that exists, with venture capital. And I'm like starting to realize that this Silicon Valley media engine that sold me on the vision of what all this was, that I was watching erode as it started to scale up, is like, there's something distorted and wrong about that. Like, we're the mark. as the innovator, we're the 1 in 10 in the portfolio who's all in, and they're not all in on us. We're 1 in 10. We're a number to them. What is weird, and then the informational asymmetries and the same relationships existed there, and the same games existed there. It's like, oh, money's the manager. And so that brought me full circle back eventually. As I'm looking into things like holacracy, sociocracy, and like how do you change all of this, and like conscious capital or purpose driven investing, and like the system is not designed quite right to solve for this. And eventually I stumbled across DAOs, the Ethereum.org site had this page around DAOs and had like pseudocode of different ways to run a governance contract. And Ethereum, Bitcoin, interesting. That portion of me that knew that macro markets were kind of messy and not quite right for and squandering our human potential. The Ethereum was like, oh, this shapes work. This changes how we work, because it changes the entire value network, not just a store of value and transactions. It's like this thing can make decisions about how we move together towards a mission or a purpose, using funds. And I was like, that was mind blowing. And so that was my rabbit hole moment. And it happened to coincide with meeting Joe Lubin at Consensus via one of Sobel's co-founders, the venture that I work on now, who Donnie introduced us to Joe. And it's been a game of like, what is a DAO, and how is this all going to like reshape everything, and in particular how we work and how we collaborate, how we coordinate. And that was the moment for me. It was just like, this changes everything.
You've got to be the first one, I think, that's been on our show that DAO was the thing that got you in.
Yeah.
Usually it's Bitcoin or like, I don't know, NFTs is very popular as well. But DAO, I feel like this is the first one, which is super cool. I love it. I'm curious what DAOs were, well, two questions. One, what DAOs were around when you first saw this? Like, was there ones that were actually like launched and like you went in and checked them out and were learning from them? And then two, what is it about DAO? And maybe this is the what is a DAO you can go into, but like, what is it about the DAO where you were like, oh, this is it. This makes sense. This changes everything. Like, can you just walk us through sort of what that was?
Yeah, totally. So no, there weren't really any practical DAOs. I mean, the DAO hack had happened recently. I mean, this was 2017 when I stumbled into the concept of DAOs. And so, so we had the promise of DAOs, we had the theory of DAOs, and we had a technology that made DAOs possible so that they could, And so when I was looking at it to sort of the second part of your question, and then I met Joe, and what Consensus was doing was what I would classify as a proto DAO. They recognized the potential of the technology and were building the infra, and they were doing a lot of what I've seen DAOs do in 2021 way back then, which is like, the tooling wasn't quite there yet. It was even more so not quite there yet in 2017. And Consensus, as the Consensus mesh, was trying to figure out how they socially organize like a DAO while they wait for sort of, as they were building the tooling that matures the space into a DAO. I mean, Gnosis was a part of the portfolio, Gitcoin was a part of the portfolio. Like there's, lots and lots of folks who were the identity plays. Many of them came from that Consensus portfolio. Initially it was a U port, but today it's, all of these plays like Ceramic and Disco and many others are influenced or were a part of directly that U-port team. And so I think, there was a proto DAO happening there. And that's why I was so excited about, going to Consensus and being able to immersively get in to something that was, seeing the potential of DAOs and trying to build that whilst doing off-chain, the behavioral components as to the best of their abilities. And that's messy. That's what we've seen recently. That's messy and that doesn't quite work. So then that brings me to the second part of your question, which is like, well, so what is the potential of a DAO? Like, why was I so excited? It's because I had seen as part of my research and interest in like how you do scaled up agile, or how you do this holacracy, sociocracy, or how you like get more conscious in your investing and the relationships with your investors as innovators, and like, get more decentralized behaviorally in how you move power and authority within your organization instead of concentrating it into these power over coercive relationships that are the managerial hierarchy. And as I was researching that, I was like, that always falls down when you get closer and closer to the sort of the money and the flow of the money and the decisions related to that, and that accidentally, meaningfully or not meaning to, it starts to become kind of like the culture was declared and put on posters on the wall, but we couldn't actually enact it when like the rubber hit the road in the really, really existentially threatening moment. And I saw it even in some organizations that did it so well socially, with these, these practices and protocols that were behaviorally reinforced, like the holacracy type movement, and they could hold on to it until that like really strong monetary threat emerged. And, like the down market or something like that. So this is actually happened to Consensus in the first phase of what they were doing, right? The down market of crypto winter emerges and applies enough of a threat that we have challenges allowing that distributed authority decision-making. We have a rapid, re-centralization. And so what I loved about the blockchain and particularly the Ethereum smart contracts, and what I was seeing there was like, you can't break the rules even under that like existentially threatening situation. If you've codified certain aspects of your power and decision making into these contracts, whether that's, you did the right program or not, one token, one vote. We've had lots of discussions about how that can go wrong, and the plutocracy and the takeovers. Getting it right is challenging, but the fact that it's immutable, or the rules have to be followed if you want to change it, that I thought that was just so magical and so underappreciated, I think. And I think that's the same magic that exists in terms of the ledger, and the innovation that was Bitcoin. And so I think that to me was like, okay, well, certain threatening situation emerges, and I can't all of a sudden grab control and erode what we declared was going to happen because it was only reinforced socially. Like, if I want to change that, I have to go through the voting mechanic. I have to, make the change. And the more and more stuff that goes on chain, I think the more reinforced and hardened that is, and therefore it got back to this root of like what I saw was all about organizations. It's like organizations were great when we trusted one another, and when a threatening situation emerged, if we couldn't sustain that trust because we were afraid that somebody was just going to grab control because they could theoretically, it didn't matter that they were, a good person and they weren't going to do it. The fact that they theoretically could would start to change the behaviors of the people in the system, and we would start to not trust one another, and it got so gross so fast. And I think that's the dysfunction of all organizations and our work, and like the magic of a smart contract as a means of governing the things that usually start to feel the most threatening, like how is the money going to flow, and who gets to decide stuff around here, particularly the most important thing, like me getting paid or not, or being able to participate or not. And so the more permissionless that became, and where it's permission, the more auditable and immutable the code that's running that the more security I get. May not be the ideal system, but at least I can trust that it's going to behave the way I think it's going to.
It's very interesting to place the benefits of a DAO in the lens of under stress. I hadn't even really thought about that is actually the why of DAOs, is that they thrive in those moments when, as you said, under stress, particularly financial, is when organizations break down, power gets centralized, and that's when work sucks and bad decisions get made and people get fired or lose relationships or lose companies. And those are the moments when actually code can help us so much by keeping it simple and reminding us of what actually matters, which we at one point as an organization, as a DAO, probably set and we're very intentional about. It's very interesting to look at it from that lens. I just want to come back to one thing you said, because you mentioned the DAO hack. And I don't think a lot of people know about the DAO hack. I think that is actually, if you're an OG, you know about that, if you were around back in 2016. But I just want to touch on that quickly, because I do think it's an interesting story. So the DAO hack was back in 2016. I believe it was MakerDAO. Am I correct that it was MakerDAO?
To be honest, it's I don't think it was MakerDAO. It was the DAO.
It was just the DAO.
Yeah.
Okay,
it was the DAO.
DAO.
It was the first DAO made on Ethereum.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's the first DAO made on Ethereum, and they did they raised about 150 million from tokens, right? 150 million from tokens, and then they were hacked, and that hack led to, I think, a lot of bad media around DAOs, which is why essentially there was like a DAO winter almost for a few years where nobody was wanting to get involved with DAOs because there was so much bad press because of this hack. And it also didn't lead to the fork between Ethereum and Ethereum Classic? Yeah.
Yes, it did. Yeah.
It did,
so,
right?
Yeah, it did. Yeah, because they made a decision to reverse history, and they effectively socially governed the chain. And so this thing that I'm saying is one of the most beautiful things about a blockchain, is that in this particular case, they came together. There is always a social component. I think that's like the naive utopia is that like it'll all be coded and it can't be changed. But the problem is there is always a human element and a human layer. And like in this particular case, for better or for worse, I'd argue, hindsight 2020, for better, they made the decision to reverse this out. But it's also been sort of the thorn in their side, in the sense that, at the end of the day, the validators decide. And so in a lot of cases, it's not that the code it's not like AI in the sense that like you code it and then it runs stuff. There is one of the cool things about crypto, is yes, we encode it and therefore we can have a higher degree of trust in it, but we've encoded the rules, and the rules included that validators can fork. And that's actually a feature, not a bug, that they can form consensus or they can disagree, and under disagreement, they can't be coerced. And so I think the other gift of this space can be analyzed in this DAO hack and the fork of Ethereum and Ethereum Classic, is because they made a decision socially. The miners, saying validators like it's already 2023.
September 19th, baby. September 19th.
Yeah, that's right. I'm already, post-merge here. But the miners effectively get to, make a decision, and those are effectively human governed still, but they have to play by the rules, which is, like the Ethereum Classic crew couldn't violently overtake, Ethereum as a minority. They had to play by the rules, and the rules were, if you're really, really disagreeing with this and we can't form consensus, then we will fork. And so they did. And so I think this is another sort of important element relative to like what I like about DAOs and also the limits of DAOs, is that I don't think that DAOs stop some of the nasty, horrible things that occur that make work suck for people. You could make a DAO that really, really sucks. And you can have existential, and it's not like they're completely, all DAOs are going to be able to be resilient in the face of existential threat and not have icky social things occur. No, we've seen already that like, that happens, but I think what the fundamental difference is that we can't stop that from happening, but we can stop people from, manipulating the system, because, I at least go into it eyes wide open. I'm like, if we fast forward to the future and, there's a disagreement, I understand as a miner on a chain that we theoretically could fork, and that was designed as a mechanism. The idea of the Moloch contract in DAOs as a governance contract, has the right to exit in the form of a rage quit. It's built in. And I know that, and this is the magic of it, is I know that, I can put my money in, and we might we might get icky with one another, and we may disagree, but it is superior to being like a limited partner who's investing via traditional venture capital. I give my money to the venture, group, and they've got a general partner who manages the funds. Once I've deployed my funds in, like, I don't have the right to exit if I think that they're doing a bad job in the first few deals that they've done. The Moloch contract, and the way it was used by groups like the DAO as their early experimenters, they're doing these investment things, or meta cartel ventures. The folks can come in with the money and get to know each other as they're doing deals. And it's the limited partners who put the money in who are making the decisions about what deals we're going to do. And if we don't like the direction it's going, we can rage quit. And if I went into that thinking that we were all going to go on a good adventure together and it was going to work out, and then a bunch of people rage quit and we disagree and we have some icky emotional feelings about that with one another, that still sucks on a sort of human emotions level. But what doesn't suck is somebody didn't go and pull some sort of backwards maneuver to capture my funds. Even though they said they were going to do something on paper, they went and actually did something completely different. We're now in a protracted legal battle, and I'm having to understand, emotionally, I'm already a little bit burned by this experience that I'm having. Do I really want to embark on continuing that emotional journey, on the emotional exhaust of having to go through a court-based system and a legal system to try and deal with this situation? It's like, no. In this particular case, I know that if this goes sour and we have icky moments, I have still the right to remove my funds as per the rage quit thing, and nobody's going to be able to play with me and say, oh yeah, your check's coming soon. No, your check's coming. Actually, it's not coming. We've all decided that you're a problem, and so our lawyer found this little thing in the
we decided
exactly,
right? You have no option.
Exactly. And so I think that, I don't want to oversell the idea that is it removes the icky things. It's that it removes the surprise icky things and the manipulative, disgusting things that people do when there's a gray area in something and it's not just executing.
Bryan, you've just, we've talked about a few different DAOs here already, right? We're kind of diving deep into the weeds here. We've talked about, the DAO, which was kind of an investment pool, right? Where everyone just put a bunch of money and then they were going to go invest it. We talked about the Ethereum protocol, like from a like a blockchain standpoint, and how like the miners is kind of forming a DAO. But then there's like, we brought up Bankless DAO, which is neither of those. It's not an investment pool. It's not a layer blockchain. It's more of like a community that was kind of incentivized by a token. And they started building actual products. They're more of like a business. You could think of them than like an investment firm or a blockchain. Can you just step back and give us like the 101 of like, how do we understand what a DAO is for any of the listeners? And then maybe talk about the different types of DAOs you've seen, or like the different use cases of DAOs. Like, why do we even need this? Like, you've talked a lot about how you want things to be like a decentralized sort of hierarchy, I guess. And so like, let's just talk a little bit through like what that provides, like what benefits we have from that as well. And then we can kind of, I don't know, we'll expand out from there.
Yeah. Okay. So this is, yeah, I mean, this is an interesting one because this, this definition of a DAO can be like heavily contested, and like, I don't have my boilerplate version like at my fingertips right now, so I'm going to do my best.
Got to get it.
But
yeah,
I mean,
you got to get it.
I'm going to get it wrong here, because of the question. But I think, the acronym, right? Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And so, I think the decentralized component, we've been discussing it. I've talked about how effectively what drew me to DAOs is that decentralization, because I was kind of sick of some of the silliness that was occurring by over centralizing power into the managerial hierarchy, where the manager, at the end of the day, they can benevolently, that word empowerment that has become so distorted and disgusting is like, I bestow power on to you, but I can actually take it away at any moment. And that there aren't any rules that govern when I get to take it away. I can just take it away. So that centralization of that power, despite the fact that they try to decentralize it benevolently every once in a while, but can take it away when they want. When you have a truly decentralized system, or a more decentralized system, that power is far more decentralized. Definition using the word, but whatever. Yeah. Yeah. And so as it is more decentralized, this is why they talk about the miner pools, right? Because it's a form of centralization relative to the root layer of settlement that is the chain. So they talk about what how where are the geographic concentrations and the economic concentrations, like these publicly traded miner pools for things like Bitcoin. It's like is the network being captured subtly or re-centralized subtly in that way? And so I feel like, yeah, decentralization is really important because I believe that in this by decentralizing, we actually can get better decisions. Now, there are a lot of reasons why that may actually not be true, but I think that's just more on the governance mechanics. When we hyper centralize, we might be able to move fast, but we aren't resilient. And I will trade, resiliency for moving fast. And I think that when there's the opportunity for more voice to be heard and contribute to making a decision, that we are likely to make a better decision. And so the trade-offs are basically for that speed and resiliency thing. And so I think, yeah, decentralized autonomous organizations have swung more towards decentralization, but that doesn't mean that centralization is bad. It's strategically used at various points in time, and it's just bad when it becomes calcified. That's the managerial hierarchy is bad because it's slow moving. Like, you appoint a manager, but like it's actually kind of difficult to like demote, fire, etc. And so there's friction in the system, reorienting or adjusting to the environment. So that's where decentralization, I think, scores some points. The next one is autonomy. Autonomous. And now a lot of people talk about this one, and this is probably one of the more contested ones in the definition of what is a DAO, is like, I believe a DAO is more about the this stuff we've been talking about in terms of like, I have the ability to operate with my own free will inside the rules. And so I have autonomy. The DAO itself has autonomy because it's pretty much designed to, in many ways, and this is creating tons of friction in the world, it's in many ways capable of operating regardless of what a state nation says about it. And so now trying to understand how it merges into this regulatory environment, well, it's kind of designed to be orthogonal to it. It's supposed to be autonomous. It's capable of operating, even if somebody says it shouldn't be, because it's the substrate that it's using is pretty uninterruptible. And so that autonomy, I think, starts, at that base layer, but it flows all the way through. I have the autonomy to rage quit. I have the autonomy to choose to do this bounty or not within a DAO. I have the autonomy to decide to quit. I have the autonomy to decide to join. Like as a subunit in a DAO, often the treasury moves from one gnosis safe to another. It's like moving the funds. Imagine if you're like team at work, which is like some functional unit or scrum team actually had its own bank account, and the funds moved and they won't move back. Once you have them, you're working them. That's what happens in a DAO, and that's another form of autonomy. And so there's tons and tons of forms of autonomy and that autonomous nature of a DAO. And I think some people take this autonomous and think that it's more about the fact that the DAO runs the code and the code is law, and like it's like automated, a bit more. And I don't know, like, sure, blur that in there if you wish. I think that's another superpower of DAOs and might be mixed in with that autonomous component. It like the code runs, so that if this vote passes, like a more, those who are more using the A and the autonomous in this nature will say, oh, as soon as this vote passes, if it's wired up to actually deploy something, on chain, and that's uninterruptible or doesn't have human signers, between the vote and the execution, that they like to think of that as like a more enhanced, autonomous component of DAO. So I don't know. I see some debate there. It's basically, do you have the autonomy to act within the rules, or are the rules self-executing? Blur those two together and you're getting a beautiful A in the middle of the DAO. So decentralized, autonomous, and then organization is pretty straightforward. It's like, we're using these mechanisms and this decentralization and autonomy, not to do DeFi, not to, have immutable transactions. We're using this to create a human organization that can do anything that human organizations try to do.
Very, very good explanation, by the way. I really like that.
Great definition. You did great. Yeah. We'll record that. Yeah, we actually are recording that. We're gonna cut it for you and give it back to you. And now you have your boilerplate.
Yeah. Let's talk about the organization side of things. So you talk a lot about hierarchy. And if you've been in DAOs now, I mean, the whole idea is, like you said, decentralize it. Don't have this hierarchy anymore where you have the managers or the leaders up top and all that kind of stuff. Yet I noticed in a lot of DAOs, we still sort of have that. Now, not necessarily because, like you said, there are things where power is distributed and you can't take that power back because it's written in the code, right? Whether that's via NFT or a token or whatever. So that is cool. But I do find in the way that people work in DAOs, especially in larger DAOs, there's still sort of a hierarchy. So is that the way that it should be? Or like, how would you organize or structure a DAO in terms of like, is there hierarchy? Is there not hierarchy? What do you think is the best way to actually be able to get shit done, but keep it sort of decentralized, like you're saying? Like, what do you think is the best sort of setup here, if there is one?
So I mean, I love this question. And I think I pick on traditional hierarchies in the managerial hierarchy, and I label it as such, and either a traditional corporate, managerial hierarchy. And the reason is because I don't think hierarchies are bad. I think that is an inferior form of hierarchy. And it's an over-centralized form of hierarchy, and it's extremely calcified. It's not very dynamic. It doesn't change. And so I've been picking on those things along the way, and that is very, purposeful. I think DAOs will have many hierarchies, and I think that they will be very dynamic if the DAO is sensing and responding correctly to, what they're trying to achieve, and how the markets external to them, or the forces external to the DAO, wherever that boundary is, that if they're not adjusting to that, then that's the problem. It's not that hierarchies are natural, but it's weird and unnatural to hyper-centralize them. And try to draw a traditional org chart. We love it. Our brains love the simplicity of it, but it's like linearizing a non-linear thing. Like, feels better when we linearize it, or it feels better when we fit something to a Gaussian curve, and do a mean distribution on it. But it doesn't mean it's correct. I believe that a traditional hierarchy functions as a simplification that was good enough under some circumstances, and maybe is still good enough under some circumstances. It was invented because it was required. And so I would argue that DAOs are rediscovering. Anyone who declares always it's flat got stuck on a monolithic governance, and they get made fun of in the, mainstream media, or even within the conference circuit, where we joke about ridiculous proposals being voted on by all token holders, like, should the color be red or blue kind of thing. And we immediately look at these types of scenarios and think, that seems silly, and well, if you truly remain flat, that is the silliness that ensues. And so I think really functional DAOs actually start to naturally create hierarchy. So they have this simple mechanic of like, everybody gets to vote on things. And the very first things they start to vote on typically is spawning their structure. They start to create hierarchy naturally, because they start to try and do stuff. People propose to do stuff. They get funds being distributed into an autonomously controlled, wallet, in the form of a Gnosis safe or a multi-sig. You've immediately spawned structure. That unit now has autonomy, and it exists, and it is doing something different on its own that is in service to this thing that we all are beholden to, but is separate and different. And that is, starting to produce structure. And I think, but what's neat about that is that it's dynamic. Another form of structure that can exist is if you have a delegation mechanism in your governance. They have the more liquid democracies like Gitcoin and their stewards, or many of the recent airdrops, the ENS, etc. You have the ability to delegate the tokens to the stewards, who would then participate in governance. You have effectively now created a naturally forming, hierarchy. The stewards get to make decisions, and I move my tokens, but I have the right to revoke my tokens. So I still have that autonomy in the system, and that's very real. So I think, but I think hierarchies naturally emerge, and so what's more important is that we don't get stuck with something that is incorrect relative to the mission or the purpose of the DAO. So we might centralize into a grants committee. You can see DAOs do this as well. Another mechanism of centralization to be functional is like, oh, we want things to go faster, and we want to make some quick investment decisions. So we're going to create like a scouting or a grants committee or something like that. And we're going to elect the people into that, and they will have a term. So therefore it's not static, they're not indefinitely, sort of elected. Or until we fire them and run a proposal to fire them. It's less calcified than a traditional managerial hierarchy. And then they have, the ability to make these decisions. And then we'll reevaluate whether those were, whether, first of all, those were the right people. And second of all, was that the right structure for us making decisions where we've arrived at now? And in many DAOs, you start to recognize, oh, okay. And so it's really about this evolution of the hierarchy, and there being lots of different hierarchies and them being emergent in nature, whether it's even down more at the micro level, because I've been concentrating more on the hierarchies and how they emerge at the like a macro level of a DAO, or the root of the organization. But like even within a pod, scrum, guild, whatever you want to call it, work stream, project, it's better when there's a naturally emerging, sort of hierarchy there. And that often comes in the form of role crafting. First people start doing stuff and we just coordinate, which is like a peer-based remuneration, or we, retroactively airdrop. Like that's a pattern in DAOs. But structure does naturally start to emerge, and we start to go, oh, okay, well, this is actually like you're doing this role and you're doing this role, and we start to form agreements around that, and we start to harden that structure a little bit, whether it's through, elections, role appointments, or a mechanism for you do some bounties and then you're a part of this team, and then you can be you earn this role of team membership. And like I think DAOs are just starting to understand, okay, this stuff is supposed to come back in, but it's supposed to come in naturally, and it's supposed to be dynamic and be capable of responding to problems and change. So I think hierarchies and DAOs are going to be a thing, and we're just like in the early phases of figuring that out, because most DAOs are like, have barely gotten past the, hey, let's pool a bunch of capital on this really cool new thing, make some decisions to distribute it. And then they like spawn structure, and they're like, oh, what is this thing? What do we do with it?
You mentioned a couple things I want to touch on. Bounty and compensation in a DAO, I think, are big topics. But before we do, I just want a context set here, and I'm curious if you know a number. How many people do you think are involved in DAOs right now? Do you have any number on that? Any estimate? I've never seen anybody take a guess. I'm just curious. And then I think where I'm curious is like, where do you see that going? Do you see a world where we all work in DAOs? Will we work in one DAO? Will we work in many DAOs? Just curious to know, like, context, and then maybe like where you see this whole thing going, and then we'll get back more into like the tactical side.
Yeah. Okay. I love this. I have no clue how many people are in DAOs, and you've got me curious because I recently saw some stats around like NFTs, like, you know, the number of wallets that, you know, unique wallets that hold an NFT, you know, stat. And I did, you know, world population relative to that stat, and came back with like, whoa, it is like a fraction of a percent.
So small.
and it was like this was like one of my like numbers for we're early. And I think DAOs would be just as astonishing, if not more so, because I think NFTs got substantially more traction in this cycle than DAOs did. I think DAOs were a product of, you know, the NFT thing. There's a strong interrelationship there of like, we start with an NFT drop and then all of a sudden we congregated socially and we were like, what do we want to do with it? And let's DAO, you know?
I just looked up, I just looked up the A16Z report on State of Crypto. I knew they had some numbers on DAOs. This doesn't give us the number you're looking for, but active voters in proposal makers all time is 657,000. Now that's wallet addresses that have voted or made a proposal. So like, who knows, you can have multiple wallets obviously inside of a one DAO or multiple DAOs. So
I got 3 or 4.
Yeah, exactly. So like, let's say a few 100,000 max so far, if that. Honestly, that's probably stretching it.
So there you go. So the number is really, really small. I think the other one, the question that I heard in there was like, okay, so like fast forward to the future, you know, is it all DAOs? And like, that's an interesting one. I think yes, but not in the way we think so. I think that basically what we're doing now is basically figuring out how to remix everything that we've played with previously, in terms of like governance and value networks, and that DAO and the acronym and these games that we're playing and the new patterns we're playing with right now, and how we're mashing up things we used to do with these new technologies. Like, we're in the early phases of just discovering how these technologies influence our coordination, collaboration, and general work, compensation, et cetera, related behaviors, decision-making behaviors, et cetera. And so like, we're refactoring all of that. And I think, you know, first of all, I think the acronym dies at some point. I think that, yes, all work starts to use these mechanisms in the same way that the internet kind of ate the world. And we don't really talk about it as the internet. You know, every once in a while we pause and say it was the internet that ate the world, you know, but really what was happening in the early phases of the internet is kind of instructive, I think, to what might be happening right now. In the early phases of the internet, we were recognizing that most of the things that were done on paper, you know, because it was mostly about information, you know, that was the technological revolution there was information based. And I think the one that's happening right now is more like value network based. So those were the information networks. And like, what's going to happen when you totally refactor the information networks, like the Telegram did way back in the last major change? Then the other one was the steam engine. And I think the blockchain is synonymous with the steam engine. Some people like to use that kind of analogy, but like, I think if we look back at that and say, okay, well, if that was the information transformation, then, you know, in the early days of the internet, what we did was we digitized our paper practices. And it was kind of like Web 1.0 was like, we did this thing on paper. And so now I'm going to have a blog or a zine, you know? And so I'm going to do the thing on the website. I will have my storefront, you know, on my website. You know, in the late 90s, it was like, okay, how do I move all my brick and mortar into this storefront? And we overcompensate too, because there's some things that should maintain a storefront. When we watch what, like, you know, Apple, you know, has done with their, you know, sort of their experiences in physical locations, and, you know, their digital, like, you know, extremely digital company still has a storefront. Why? You know, and so I think that same thing is occurring. And then we fast forward, you know, and we start to like play with like remixing things. We start messing with like how we work with information and what we can do with this. And and I think we start to move away from websites looking at, particularly like the B2B ones in the really early days, were just like the paperwork processes of the office digitized. And then we watch these things become something completely different, like what Salesforce did to the sales process and the marketing automation systems that plugged into that. And it's like, that is so substantially different than like, what it meant to maintain your paper Rolodex and your customer relations, bookkeeping that you would do. And so I think, but it took them a long time to get there, and the interfaces, shifted, and they became more about, solving the problem and less about just like, digitizing the paper process. And I think DAOs are in this phase where we're like digitizing prior work behaviors, using smart contracts and these governance mechanics. We're just like, we're borrowing from like past patterns in like organizations, whether it's from like some of the more interesting ones that are underexplored, like holacracy, sociocracy, but like what would happen when you add smart contracts to that, as well as like, historical patterns of like governance and like maybe accidentally like rediscovering some of the things that maybe the those who were, the founders of state nations in their current form might have come to understand over time organically, like we're maybe rediscovering some of that. And then we're also playing with things like, if you look at Glenn Whale and Radical Markets, they're looking at things that were hypothetical. I think DAOs are also really good at this. They're like good at starting to create experiments around things that we thought were interesting, wrote some papers about, but never actually found a test bed for, because there was too much friction relative to the existing system that you couldn't try and launch that test, in your local government. But you can launch it inside a DAO, that says, hey, let's go buy a constitution, which is delightfully adjacent, right, to this storyline. But I think honestly, if we fast forward all the way to, to conclude on this question, is that it eats the way we work, and it's some crazy mashup of underexplored experiments in governance and economics and work behavior psychology, sort of stuff, totally mashed up with, some of the Lindy, things that have really stuck over time because they were good innovations that we need to build upon, but digitize. And we'll find that balance point with all the experimentation. As long as the experimentation is not limited in these early to mid phases, then I believe that, similar to the internet, you end up with like something on the other side where it's like, oh, that's just work. That's just that's just how I go to work. That's just that's just governance. That's just how we make decisions. And, the fact that it's over top of, these protocols that we like to talk a lot about today, and proof of stake versus proof of work, and like, et cetera, or these primitives like, wallets and multi-sigs, and like, we're way too low level, and like eventually this stuff gets so abstracted. It's like, oh, this is how I go to work. You used to work like that? That's so weird.
You used to go into the office and write things on paper? Weird.
And you mean like you had to give 2 weeks notice, and then you weren't really sure whether and they could fire you, and you weren't really sure if they were going to honor their agreements about severance, and like,
they paid you in paper. Why did they give you paper? What did you do with the paper?
Wait a second. So there was this guy in the middle when you were buying a house who did this.
Just took 15%. It's going to be hilarious to think back on in the future, to be honest. But question, what do you think, like right now, as you said, DAOs are very new, and until we get to the point where we're like, it's so obvious that we're all going to work in DAOs, we won't even call them that. Like, what are the challenges in the way right now? Like, what are we not doing right? Or what are the things we need to fix? Now, you've built a company, Sobel, around fixing a problem in the DAO space, part of DAO tooling. So maybe you could talk about like what that problem you solved there, or attempting to solve, and then maybe just touch on what other problems or challenges are we facing in this space right now?
Yeah, I think the one I'm pretty passionate about is like usability, accessibility. So we need more people experimenting. We need more DAOs. We need more people with ideas coming in and and thinking of a new remix or mashup. And so we actually have to like decentralize that. And so because right now the barriers to entry are pretty high. And one of the challenges with usability is that it is a path often to centralization and capture. You know, one of the beautiful things about Web 2 is that they are extremely usable. The experience is extremely tuned, and it's because they've sort of hyper centralized certain things to control that experience. And so I think the challenge that we're facing right now, particularly in DAOs and DAO tooling stacks, is that there's one heck of a hurdle to get involved. The hurdles that we used to talk about in terms of usability have been compounded. Like the original hurdles back in 2017 that we were talking about, like it's too hard to figure out how to buy your tokens, move them, get a wallet, what is this seed phrase thing? And so that's now been compounded by all the protocols related to work and decision-making and compensation that are existing in DAOs and, just a part of normal operations of a DAO. Like we talk about this onboarding challenge. And really what I think it comes back to is the usability of things. And so I would like to see consolidated experiences that do not sacrifice on the autonomy of the DAO tooling stack. That is one of the fundamental problems of like B2B tools. It's centralized around, Workday, Salesforce, Atlassian Suite. These are, NetSuite, on the CRM, on the ERP side. And they just basically through M&A, brought everything under their marketplace, and so what they provided was like a one-stop shop and an interface. If I go as a salesperson from one location to the next, I now have a ubiquitous experience and I can transition easily. And so we need to get there without doing what they did to get there. And so one of the things I'm really passionate about with Sobel is how do we create that beautiful experience of a consolidated sort of like map of your DAO, especially because we talk about all of these things too, like DAOs are messy in the sense that they have these very organic and emergent hierarchies that are constantly changing through the governance systems. And as these, as the DAO scales up, it actually becomes more and more complex. So Sobel's first thing that we, concentrated on was like, we need a visual map. People are visual, and like Discord channels as your org chart, or, somebody who's benevolently drawing circles in Figma to show what the org structure has become is not a sustainable approach to really scaling up DAOs. And so Sobel's first trick was to concentrate on creating a visual map with the least amount of overhead to maintain that map, because it's rapidly changing. And if it becomes bankrupt, it's like, those wikis sites, where someone was dumping great information that's useless 3 months from now. It's like, not maintained. And so Sobel works first on that problem. But the second is like, discovering the DAO tooling and wiring it up. There are amazing things similar to what happened in DeFi. There was this composability of like, I can use all these different things in these Legos in interesting ways, and really helpful solutions emerged in the DeFi space, like Zapper, Zerion, where they have a consolidated dashboard that is a view into your total portfolio by just like connecting your wallet or multiple wallets into a bundle. And I can see everything that's going on in my portfolio, and it's my first landing spot. And Zapper also has the ability to discover things like bridging, swapping in their interface, but they're actually, using the composability of, sort of the underlying protocols like 1inch, Uniswap, Hop protocol, etc. And so I think something similar has to happen in the DAO space, because now it's like quite usable. It's like I don't have a million tabs open trying to understand what's going on, or a crummy interface in the primitive thing that is my wallet, which is primitive for the reasons of security. Like my MetaMask and my Gnosis Safe multisig should look a little bit like I'm pseudo reading code, because it's a secure, it's an environment where like what I'm seeing here is what's going to execute. It hasn't been abstracted and I don't have to trust them. But layers of abstraction are super helpful in terms of accessibility. And so Sobel is also working on this idea of like, how do you discover these things and wire them up? And an example would be like, hey, you want to spawn a team. What if you were able to create a proposal, route it to the correct governance mechanic, because there might be multiple in place, request funding. If the proposal is successful, the funding comes in and instantiates a Gnosis Safe for that sub team. And so now they have their own Gnosis Safe, and who the signers are going to be was a part of the proposal. maybe that they were going to have a rev share agreement on that. That was the agreement they were forming with the DAO as they built up this new project, was like, hey, whatever we're able to earn, in the future on this will come to this contract address and be split by the 0x splits protocol automatically back to the DAO and some of the early wallet addresses that were participating as per the agreement. And like, you start to need some sort of consolidated front-end interface, I think, for DAO tooling stacks. And there's going to be these roles, and these roles are going to receive these NFT hats that denote that these roles exist and that they're holders. So they're going to use hats protocol to do a somewhat soul-bound token for that. Or maybe it's a DID and a verifiable claim. Like, you can start to see that DAO tooling is sort of maturing a lot of primitives and technologies, but there isn't like an interface there like there is, for DeFi. And so Sobel would really like to be that visual map of what's going on, and a place where you can more easily discover and quickly wire up the changes that you'd like to make to it, leveraging all the awesomeness of these protocols. And for a new DAO participant, this is a place to discover what's going on and start to participate it in, at first, an abstract, fairly usable way. And then as you go deeper into sort of specialist roles within the DAO, you might actually want to spend more time inside your Parcel HQ or Utopia interface if you're a part of the finance guild. But if you're, just someone who wants to request being able to participate in this role and therefore receive the recurring compensation that's coming from, say, Utopia. They really just want to be in an interface where they see the role, see what the role would be comped if they apply. And then if they're given the role, they know that the compensation is going to run, and they never really had to open another tab and learn a new tool or put a request in, to a Gnosis safe for a transaction, or which we can't do if you're not a signer. And like, there's just so much there. And that burden also exists for the people who are in those deeper positions, those specialist positions. They're running around. They're the automation layer in DAOs in a lot of the case right now. And so Sobel sees that. It sees these folks who are like exporting the CSV from the coordinate results, and then tuning up things and then putting them through the Gnosis CSV airdrop transaction so that it can do a multi-send. And then they're all like pinging each other on Discord, like it's time to sign, or if they're trying to do a swap as, treasury managers. There's very early days in that regard. And there's these like, these hero roles of like deep DAO operators who are doing the legwork of gluing this stuff together. And I think that Sobel's vision is that we can see what's going on, and we can automate more of this, and we can do it in a way where we don't take away the sovereignty of the DAO tooling stack and replicate the mistakes of the DAO in a box. They're like, woohoo, great experience, totally destroyed the beautiful decentralized autonomous vibrant stack of DAO tooling Legos that we should see if we do this right.
So is it meant to be, just to kind of summarize, I guess, it's meant to be the homepage of the DAO, essentially. It's like you come into the DAO and you go into this page, and now you can see what proposals are there, what, voting that you need to do, and what's going on with the treasury, and who's in what guilds. And it's like everything you need in this DAO. Right now, you have some really cool tools that we're using for all the different DAOs. We actually have this problem right now. We just are in the process of launching Web3 Academy DAO with our community. And we have all of these tools, and it's like, to find these tools, it's like going to Notion, go to that Discord channel that says like, important links. And it's just like, it's crazy. And so Sobel's trying to be like that homepage, I guess. But then another layer, it's also trying to automate a lot of the things and connect them all together so that it's not just, hey, here's where you find the things. It's actually doing a lot of things for you as well. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, you got it. Because in order to be that map of what's going on, you have to be aware of the change. And so some of that you can just like read from connecting, to SDKs or the blockchain itself, and reading the data and monitor the change. But I think it's also best if we provide that service of making it easier to wire this up, so that you don't have to be like, a hardcore dev to do it. As a part of that, the benefit is that also keeps the map up to date, because if you're proposing a new unit and instantiating its Gnosis and any of the other stuff, like the compensation model for that new unit as it's spinning up and being funded, yeah, if we can make that easier, but also capture the change as it's happening, we're reducing the overhead of maintaining these maps. These maps, we understand the value of them, and some people go out there, you know, and are like the Wikipedia, one percenters who are maintaining that thing. And same thing's happening in DAOs in terms of knowledge. But I think, at Sobel, we want to make that easier for them and get in line to the change, get things more automated, so that you finally get this, like homepage for DAO ops or your DAO operational hub.
Love it. I have two questions for you. First, actually, before I even ask these questions, I love the comparison to Zapper. That's or Zaper, whatever it is. That's the best way. That was, that clicked for me. Cause like that is your DeFi or your money kind of homepage. We can see it all. And I didn't realize, you're like, yeah, we do need that for a DAO. Of course, there's so many tools and we need something that kind of aggregates it all and sorts it all. So question for you, for new DAOs or new people who want to enter DAOs, a lot of our audience is this, right? They want to be a part of a DAO. They're trying to learn Web3. So I have two questions. One, what's your advice to someone who wants to enter a DAO, right? Is looking to enter a DAO? Like, what advice should they have as they're getting started? What should they be thinking about? What should they be doing? If you have any advice specific to someone who's joining a new DAO, it's especially if it's a bigger DAO, it can be very overwhelming. So for some people, that's very difficult. So anyway, just looking for some advice there. And then two, you mentioned so many tools as you were explaining here what Sobel does. Maybe give us your top whatever, but if you're a DAO, what are the must-have tools that you found anyway that can really help you, organize or get shit done inside of a DAO? What are the big ones that you've seen or that you use?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So for getting started, these are great questions. And for getting started, I would say there's kind of two phases to getting started. And people talk about the first phase a lot, with the friction of coming in and it being really chaotic, and you're struggling to discover how to contribute, and you're kind of feeling disoriented if you're not somebody who's a gamer or who hasn't participated in a social platform like Discord. Trying to navigate Discord or some random out of date Notion page that describes how to join the DAO, and that's not actually how you join the DAO now when you find out when you jump into the Discord. So persevering through that and bravely crashing meetings is really important. So just recognize that will be uncomfortable, prepare for it up front, and therefore pick a DAO that the passion that you have for what mission they're on will be strong enough to pull you past that hurdle. Because it's not great, and some are better than others, and they have techniques to do this. But yeah, and then also double check. So one, the mission, right? It'll be strong enough to pull you past that and prepare for it. And then two, is double check that it's that passion likely will align to a skill that you have in some way, and the more generalized the DAO, the better, because you have a better shot at trying to find it. This is why Bankless or most social media oriented DAOs like Bankless, education oriented, never ending hackathon, these very, very broad missioned DAOs like Bankless are great starting points for a lot of folks, because you're sure to find something somewhere in there that matches your skills and passions. And so that's often also pick one that either do your research that you're going to be passionate enough that you're going to find something and overcome that hurdle, or you pick one where you're probability is you'll find something like a real broad DAO like Bankless. Second part though is watch out for the addiction on the other side. There's nobody, creating balance for you. And so once you get over that hurdle, you had to work for it so much. You had a bit of FOMO leading into it, that once you pick up on the other side, you will start to feel all in. So DAOs are, folks who are participating in DAOs start to talk about the imbalance, the work-life balance, the mental health. These things are real. They exist in any form of work, but I think the frenetic, fast-moving nature of DAOs and the fact that they're always on, there's no managers to tell you to slow down, and you're actually just having to manage your own emotions relative to your work and find your own pace. Just check in on that as you're going, because I think the common story is I had to work so hard for this to get in, and I'm so blinking excited about what I'm doing and so enthusiastic in a way that I haven't been before. When that success hits, that you can be drawn too deeply in. So watch for that. And yeah, I think in terms of tools, I'm a big fan of the simple start. Like I've rattled off some of the more advanced ones and some of the emerging ones like Hats Protocol and there's Disco, etc. But I think the really basic stack that can progress quite nicely is the sort of snapshot Gnosis safe combo. And the rest is kind of mostly social, drop an NFT, when you're just getting started. And then I think as it starts to layer up, there's beautiful ways to graduate that. You can start to add in, well, first of all, more Gnosis safe, so the thing can kind of spiral outwards as you structure up. You can start to automate things more using the Zodiac, the Gnosis Guild Zodiac. That is an appreciated tool that I wish was easier to just discover and get using, because it can start to make it such that the snapshot votes are automatically executing, and you don't have to have the signers in the loop because one of the challenges you'll start to run into is getting the signers together to have timely transactions occur. And so that starts to put more automation into the DAO stack. I think that starting initially with something like Coordinate, because a lot of what you're doing is very uncertain in the early days, and so having a period of time where you retroactively in small teams coordinate in really large crews is fairly gameable, doesn't work, starts to become more of a popularity contest. But these peer-based remuneration of giving each other tokens and then that settling up a prorated payroll that you're going to run, I think that's a great way to get started when you're dealing with a lot of uncertainty. Bounties are another great onboarding trick. So using tools like dwork or Clarity for these types of things. To just get some clear work and work structure up and going as a DAO. That when you're starting, these are sort of like, would be sort of my starter stack. And then it starts to get more advanced from there. Maybe checking out DAO House and the Mullet contract. There's some unique gifts to the Mullet contract, out of the gate in comparison to the very open free form, snapshot Gnosis combo. And then, there's lots of great stuff after that, like payroll. And enhancing automation there. I think, what Parcel and Utopia are doing and other ones that I mentioned, they're effectively the nice sort of like finance payroll automation tools that sit over top of your Gnosis safe. So again, you can graduate, like we were Gnosis safe and we were signers and we were doing CSV imports to run distributions. Well, now we can start to have a tool that feels a little more like defining wallets and putting recurring payments on those wallets, or recurring payments from the main root treasury down into the to the various guilds, which are kind of like their seasonal or the seasonally agreed to monthly amounts that they're going to receive, and you can start to trickle in versus lump summing. And there's lots of stuff that you can start to layer in, and there's just more and more arriving. I mean, like what Orca Protocol is doing with their pods, is a neat method of extending that sort of Gnosis, the Gnosis, safe multi-sig. Sorry, I keep saying Gnosis safe, but they're technically safe now, I think.
Really, they rebranded.
They rebranded and kind of spun out a bit. So, but anyways, that's my advice is start simple and kind of layer up. And if you pick the right ones off the hop, they are composable and they layer up, versus like the DAO in a box solutions. I personally would steer away from them because of the potential lack of flexibility and lock-in down the road.
Right. Makes sense. Thank you for that. That's super, super helpful. You just were talking about payroll. And one of the things I'm noticing in DAOs, especially in the bigger DAOs, and there are DAOs like that have been around for a while that have sort of figured this out, but I want to talk about how DAOs make this a profitable endeavor for everyone that's involved. One of the things I notice in DAOs right now is, like you said, people are working like crazy, and often people are doing it like for free to try to get in, or are doing it where they're being paid less than they probably should be. Now, there are some people making a ton in DAOs. There's no doubt about that. But especially in a DAO where you have 1,000 people or whatever, and they don't necessarily have a ton of revenues yet, like, how do you see this whole like compensation and payroll, and like, how does this all work where it's actually like, because if these DAOs don't become profitable in the future, and the people working in the DAOs aren't making better money than they are in Web 2, then people are leaving and they're going to go back out. I think the reason people work so heavily in DAOs right now and don't care is because it's cool and we're experimenting, trying something new. It's exciting, right? So we don't really care, but that's not going to last for forever. Do you find it's going to be more of these, like, the autonomous way where you have an idea, you write a proposal, where you ask for funding and then they fund you and that's how you get paid? And it's like contract work. Do you think it's like more salaries or combination? Like, how do you think we make this all kind of work?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely early days, and like you said, it's in the enthusiast segment, and the enthusiast segment is like sort of more like a never-ending hackathon or a bootstrap startup, or
exactly.
which means that in many cases the DAO game, for many, not all, but many, it kind of sits more in the hobby category, in terms of like where the rewards are at and how sustainable or predictable or secure they are relative to the alternatives that they're evaluating against. Now, I believe that there are some people who live in different state nations or geographic areas where DAOs are actually producing an opportunity to earn a living that is superior to their alternatives, and in a more hardened currency than their local currency. And so I love those stories. I think that shows some serious potential and a redistribution of wealth, potentially, if this continues to be a thing that, is quite positive in many ways. But I think in order for this to progress, yes, more DAOs and more funding for DAOs needs to kind of flow in, or more successful DAOs need to fund more DAOs. Like you watch some of the larger DAOs starting to become granting and funding and have a venture, guild and like stuff like that. And I think that's excellent, right? Like as we find, profitability, if you will, in many attributes of the system needs to continue to propagate itself. And so I think as that, sort of solves itself naturally, we'll move past the enthusiast segment. And so I think, yeah, I think that's kind of like how that will sort of play out is that, in the initial phases, mostly enthusiasts, as some become successful and resilient, they'll spawn new ones for things that they can't do themselves. And they will start to produce things that look a little bit more, to the second part of your question, like a mashup of all the ways of work. I think bounties are a little bit like, the Upwork type system for bite-sized things. There's already the concepts of like DAO salaries emerging, this, recurring payments, for roles that feel more like contract work, or renewal of guilds on a, seasonal or, every 3-month basis within DAOs. And that's starting to kind of create something that looks a lot more like, traditional sort of contractor or knowledge worker scenarios. And so I think, all these things will occur. And as governance mechanics mature, you might even start to see things that look a little bit more like hiring and firing models, and then there's probably some things that we can't even predict that will emerge in terms of working styles and compensation styles. And so like, it'll be interesting how that plays out as we put more capital in and the experiments related to compensation or working styles, find the right set point, because if you bounty everything, your DAO kind of struggles, and because you can't Upwork building every business kind of thing. And it's the same idea. We're relearning some of these things as we go inside here, and I think we'll play with what employment, contract, and bite-sized work looks like in a self-sovereign environment of DAOs. Right. We'll see.
You're involved in so many DAOs. I think that's there's two common questions I get from people when they're thinking about getting work at Web3. One is the compensation. How do I make money? So thank you for addressing that. That is definitely something that is still being figured out. And the other is, do I just work in one? Do I work in many? You talked about balance before. Mental health, balancing this is tough. There is definitely no structure of when your day ends, when your day starts. And likely there's people in your DAO that are on the exact opposite time zone as you. So you wake up to, hundreds of messages in a Discord that you have to file through in order to get caught up and understand where the conversation is at and participate. I'm just curious, what would be your recommendation? I mean, I guess for you, how do you balance working in so many DAOs? Actually, let me ask that.
Yeah. So that's a great question. I'm not very good at it. And it was actually a fun struggle for me. I'm kind of a recovering workaholic. And so my first foray into workaholism and the you know, some of the negative attributes of it came from plugging into that Silicon Valley model and feeling the first rush of like, we're going to innovate together and we're going to do great things. And it's culturally acceptable to like work till midnight. In fact, we're going to kind of make it feel like, you know, we all should be. And like, there was just like, there's a lot of imbalance in that system. And I was sucker to it and paid the price, but it also developed some bad habits. And so I am a recovering workaholic, and DAOs reignited some of my workaholism. And some of the things that go to, you know, with it, like, you know, creating a sense of worth for myself around, you know, my job and how my peers perceive me. And that, you start adding tokens in the mix. It's like, you know, you start to get a little bit of, well, you know, did I do good in the coordinate? And like, you know, you gotta be honest, this stuff like it messes with your brain a little bit. And you know, the more social attributes of it as well. Like, you know, I really care about, you know, sort of the work experience I'm having with others, not letting them down. And like, as I started to pick up accountabilities within multiple DAOs, because of my curiosity and my exploration took me to multiple DAOs where I'd say yes to people who were like, hey, come over here, we're going to start something and we'd love to have your thoughts on X. And you're like, oh, you want me? You like me? Like, you know, okay. And so I think I actually took it to a state of complete imbalance by the end of 2021. And I started to recognize that the strategy that evolved for me was this concept of like tours of duty. And I started to recognize that there are certain types of things that I really enjoy doing. And they were no surprise to me because I've been observing these things, you know, across my entire sort of working career. And that DAOs at certain stages or certain phases or moments in time invite me to participate in those types of things. And so I'm starting to recognize this idea of like a tour of duty. And it also helps me deal with like the Discord, you know, chaos, because as I was you know, the Discord left bar nav for me is just crazy. And so I started to kind of like get better at agreeing where I was at a given moment and trying to meet those agreements, and then sort of subtly moving out when I'm moving in somewhere else. And so like I might have participated in a lot of DAOs across 2021, but I wasn't hyper focused on all of them all at the same time. I had a tendency to kind of like, you know, do something, feel that wind down for one reason or another, because DAOs are fast moving and evolving. It's like, you know, I'm not renewing this season for that role. Could somebody else take it? You know, here's why. You know, or the structure shifts in the DAO. And in the case of City DAO, for example, when they moved from the sort of core team that was doing sort of the early stuff that I was involved in, there as one of the founding citizen holders, the further decentralization of the DAO, the natural progression was towards this council phase. And the council was basically going to create sort of the constitution or charter, you know, of how they were going to operate and spawn this guild structure. You know, I chose not to participate in the council because I saw a lot of great people arrive who had new ideas, and it was time for me to sort of back away and you know, put a little bit less energy in there and create more space for myself outside of DAOs. And so, yeah, I think like just watching for those moments in time where you have to choose to renew or not renew your commitment, and respecting that's natural and that's how you need to operate in DAOs. And that, you know, for me, often the hardest part associated with that is either my own ego of like, they need me, which is totally untrue. Or the other, because I just want that to be true when I'm in that space of ego. And then the other thing that I have to watch out for is this sense of like, I'm committed to them. And I try to make those things more explicit, working as much as I possibly can on explicit commitments. You know, is very helpful for my own mental health. It's like, I'm explicitly agreeing to do this job or this role. I am not able to do this one Thank you for the invitation. And I feel that that's a thing that we will learn as we embark on this more self-sovereign way of working. We're going to have to grapple with our egos more. We're going to have to grapple with finding, more ways to express commitment in more explicit ways, so that we can get past the guilt and the shame that comes from implicit commitment of like, well, now I'm letting someone down, and it's eroding my reputation, or like the imagination spins incredible yarns, and if you make it explicit, it's not as scary, and my monkey brain isn't going crazy on me. So that's how I try to deal with it, but like I'm far from being evolved enough and aware enough to pull it off.
I think this may be our one of our last questions here, but I love, first of all, this term self-sovereign way of working, like working in self-sovereignty. I think that's super cool. I don't think I've heard that before, but I think that's very interesting. And I wonder, as you talk about the way to manage, working in a DAO or multiple DAOs, do you think that the future is us all contributing and working in a bunch of different DAOs, or even like a bunch of different communities, or like a bunch of different, communities that have certain missions? You're just kind of, well, I like to, I want things to go green, so I want to work there, and I want, equality, so I'm going to work in that DAO and kind of contribute to that. And it's like, we just find our hobbies or the things we're interested in, and we just contribute. It kind of makes sense with this whole self-sovereignty to the way you work, right? You're not stuck in one spot or owned by a specific company. I feel like we're already starting to see that even in Web 2, now that a lot of people are remote. There's a lot of people that are a part of multiple companies, whether that's consulting or freelancing or whatever. I mean, I'm a part of a bunch of different things. That's just like my nature though, as an entrepreneur. So maybe I'm more biased, but like, do you think that DAOs then make this even easier? And so we are going to be a part of a bunch of different things, because it's so easy to just like sell your tokens and move on to the next one, or, be a part of a bunch. Or do you think that we end up like really centralizing or focusing in on one thing like we do sort of now in Web 2?
Yeah, I love this. And I think the whole point of self-sovereign work is a discovery of what meaningful work looks like for you, or what, joy-filled, passion-filled work looks like for you. And so I think if the system is healthy and functional, then I'm truly in that self-sovereign, future, then I have the ability to choose. And because of I think one of my theories is because of the global abundance of work that happens when we go to this remote, digital, somewhat unbounded by state nation styles of working that DAOs are kind of unlocking, that in essence, we get less scarcity around the opportunities to do work relative to our personal passions and skills. And so and I think that, because DAOs will have so many different styles and be on so many different missions, like you said, this is the green, DAO, but it's not just the green DAO. This is this is the Australian reef Oceans Initiative DAO. And so I think that's the neat thing about it is that if I'm super focused and want to be 100%, that I will have optionality and choice potentially in that global abundance of work. And so I think some people might choose to do the 20-year career in a single DAO if it truly was the right home for them and never evolved past being the right home for them. But if it did evolve and change, that they would have the ability and the right to quickly move to a different one that matches what is right for them. I think that is the essence of a really healthy global self-sovereign work environment. And maybe I'm a bounty chaser and a mercenary. Maybe I'm a multi-DAO, maybe I'm a butterfly like me who's just like, ooh, that's cool. Ooh, that's cool. Just, architecting tours of duty in my personal sweet spot of joy. So we'll see.
It's great. It's a great answer. There were some great quotes in there that definitely we will pull out. Okay, I want to wrap up the regular interview questions and move into a bit of a speed round, just some fun questions to wrap up. And then I have one more question about Sobel and where people can find you online and how they can connect with you. Kai, you good? Any more questions on your end? Okay, cool. Okay, usually in the speed round, my first question is, what's an NFT you'll never sell? But given that we've been talking so much about DAOs, what are tokens that you'll never sell?
Yeah. I would never have my bank token, bankless DAO token balance at zero. It's just, I don't understand how that could go to zero.
I'm with you on that. I love that.
I think
Nice.
I'd have to keep some, even if they were 0 cents for nostalgia, but like, I really appreciated that community.
Cool. Favorite person to follow on Twitter?
I don't have just one. I can't do that one.
Who's somebody that pops into your head? Give me a few.
Yeah, I've been enjoying some of the thoughts from Spencer from DAO House Has Protocol recently.
Cool.
Raph the Builder is an enjoyable one to follow as well.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Awesome. Any project that you're following closely right now that you're excited about in the future? Could be NFT project, could be DAO project, could be anything in Web3.
Yeah. So I mean, I think I mentioned Disco and Hats Protocol and like Orange Protocol and like Spruce ID, Ceramic. Anyone who's doing something in the identity space, love it.
Yeah, totally. And for listeners, if you haven't already heard, we had a podcast with Evan McMullen, the founder of Disco, a few weeks back. So go back and listen to that if you want to learn more about digital identity. It's real fascinating stuff there. Something you've purchased recently for under $100 that brings you joy does not have to be Web3 or crypto related.
Yeah, $0 going for a morning walk for an hour. It's crazy.
I totally agree. I'm the same. Even if my walk is like literally if I have 5 minutes, I walk out the door and then I come back, like just to get outside. It makes such a difference. Okay, if you had a billboard with one message that 1 billion people in the world would see, what would you write on that billboard?
You don't have to work like this.
Very good.
Damn, that's a good one. That is a very good one. Well done.
We don't have a billion listeners, but however many we do have, hopefully they took that and they heard it.
Put it right on a commuter, like congested highway.
Right on a bench, right on the bus stop. Bryan, this has been amazing. Want to tell people where they can find you. Also, talk quickly about Team Sobel as your home base and the awareness you're raising there. So quickly, Team Sobel, where people can find that, and then also where people can find you and connect with you personally. And we'll put all links in the show notes.
Yeah, perfect. So we're at Team Sobel on Twitter. That'll give you the official link to our Discord server for the Sobel community. So if you're interested in the topics of decentralized work and operations in a DAO and mapping DAOs. And then I'm at Brayn Peters on Twitter. And yeah, for now, my DMs are open and I actually really enjoy connecting with people both in Discord and on Twitter.
Amazing. Bryan, this has been just fantastic. I feel like we could have gone for hours. There's so many things to unpack, and we might have to have you back on for a part 2 at some point in the future.
Yes, likewise, it was a lot of fun just talking through these topics, and love the questions.
Fantastic. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Have a wonderful day. Get outside and go for a walk.
Thank you for listening to Web3 Academy. We hope this helps you along your Web3 journey. And if it does, please share this episode and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. By the way, if you have yet to join the Discord community, you are missing out. This is where all the magic happens. This is where we learn, where we ask questions, where we network. You want to be in there. The link to join is in the description below. And finally, a quick disclaimer. Nothing in this podcast was financial advice. Crypto and Web3 can be risky. You can literally lose it all. In fact, if you invest on account of what we say, you probably will lose it all. So don't do that. In all honesty, the point of this podcast is to remove the noise of markets and price and focus on utility and implementation anyway. So you should not take any of this as financial advice. Thank you, friends, and see you in the next one.